Dyspraxia is a neurological condition that affects physical coordination and planning of movements. It does not impact intelligence, but can make daily tasks more difficult. A helpful way to describe dyspraxia is by looking at what it affects. For example, buttoning a shirt can be hard due to fine motor difficulties. Riding a bike may be tough because of problems with balance and coordination. Handwriting might be slow or unclear due to trouble with hand control. Catching or throwing a ball is often challenging due to poor spatial awareness. Tying shoelaces requires complex sequencing, which can be hard. Organizing tasks is often difficult because of struggles with planning and time management. Even navigating spaces, like moving through a crowded room, can be confusing due to spatial difficulties. The Dyspraxia in Junior Doctor's study highlighted how these challenges continue into adulthood and impact professional life, but also how proper support can make a difference. With the right support, people with dyspraxia can truly flourish in society. Welcome to this journey into the world of dyspraxia, a blend of education and entertainment designed to provoke thought, spark curiosity, and encourage reflection. This is not a lecture nor a final word. These are ideas and concepts presented to help us explore together. The aim is not to tell you what to think, but to inspire you to think differently. In Chapter 1, we begin by examining the connection between dyspraxia and intelligence, challenging common misconceptions, and exploring the rich diversity of cognitive profiles. Chapter 2 dives into the experience of dyspraxia at university, navigating learning environments, social interactions, and self-advocacy. Chapter 3 turns to business, asking how dyspraxic traits might shape innovation, leadership, and problem-solving in professional spaces. Finally, in the concluding chapter, we reflect on the lived experience of dyspraxia, how it shapes daily life, identity, and resilience. Each chapter will be accompanied by questions, not just to check understanding, but to deepen it. This is a conversation. Let's analyze this train of thought together. Dyspraxia and intelligence, a connection that will make you think, what is intelligence? So Jack has dyspraxia, but has high intelligence. Now, does that surprise you? Well, maybe it shouldn't. But even though it shouldn't, many people still associate learning difficulties with low intelligence. So let's ask the big question. The big question, does dyspraxia affect intelligence? And let me just pivot quickly, because dyspraxia, also known as developmental coordination disorder, also known as DCD, it affects motor coordination, it affects planning and sometimes speech. But intelligence, that's a whole different thing, that's a whole different story. In fact, let's take Jack. Jack can solve complex math problems, debate philosophical theories, and write stories that move people to tears. And that's not just intelligence, one can argue, that's actual brilliance. Now, before we get into this, let me just quickly state that my name's Nathan and I've been diagnosed with dyspraxia at university, and there is a strong suspicion of autism and OCD. Now, with that out the way, let's dig in. So let's talk about dyspraxia not being affected by intelligence. So to really talk about this, we need to define what is intelligence. And no, it's not just about doing well in school or remembering facts. Now, Howard Gardner proposed the theory of multiple intelligence, meaning that intelligence is multifarious. And in a sense, it was a game changer. So there's different types of intelligence. So you have linguistic intelligence, that's wordplay, storytelling, and poetry. So there's three elements there. Then you have logical mathematical intelligence, which is problem solving, coding, and science. And then you have musical intelligence. Again, we can define this concisely, which is rhythm, pitch, and melody. You have bodily kinesthetic intelligence, which is dance, sports, and using tools. And then you have spatial intelligence at yet another layer, which is visualizing objects in space, which would be great for artists and great for architects. And then you have interpersonal intelligence, which is reading others, understanding others, and utilizing what many call empathy. And then you have intrapersonal intelligence. And intrapersonal intelligence would be self-awareness. And then you have even more layers like naturalistic intelligence, which is understanding nature. And then you have existential intelligence, which is deep philosophical thought. Now let's go back to Jack. Now Jack, he struggles. He struggles with tying shoelaces. He struggles with handwriting. But even though he struggles, he has exceptional logical mathematical intelligence. His brain works like a puzzle master. And then there's Sally, and she has dyspraxia too, and she has barriers. She can't always keep up in the PE class or follow the dance steps, but she writes stories that wins competitions. Why? How does she do this? Well, she has a natural flair for language, a strong emotional intuition, and a deep philosophical mind. Matter of fact, Sally, she likes to question everything. Why do we exist? How should we treat others? And what may the future hold? Now, when we look at Sally, we see existential intelligence and we see linguistic intelligence all rolled into one. So when people assume dyspraxia equals low intelligence, they're missing the picture, they're missing the whole picture, because it's not about what someone can't do, it's also about what they can do. So here's some questions to consider to aid your understanding in this area. Question number 1, which types of intelligence do you see in yourself or others that aren't always recognized in school? Question number 2, how does Sally's story challenge common assumptions about intelligence and ability? And finally, question 3, why? Why is it important to understand the different ways intelligence can show up in people with dyspraxia? And I think those 3 questions, when explored, can really aid understanding. So now let's talk about the hidden strength of the dyspraxic mind. Let's start with the question, why? Why would dyspraxia create out-of-the-box perspectives? Well, the answer may be simple. When the world doesn't fit you neatly, you find new ways to engage with it. In this sense, dyspraxic individuals or individuals with dyspraxia often approach tasks from unexpected angles. They may not follow conventional methods, but even though they don't follow conventional methods, they discover novel solutions. Why is this? This may be because they've had to adapt. Their brains are wired for 2 things. They're wired for creativity and they're wired for resilience. And that's a real strong combination. So there's a real connection between being different and having dyspraxia. The struggle to do what others find easy, like catching a ball or organizing a backpack, means that there being the people with dyspraxia brains are constantly building workarounds. And what does that build? That builds a culture, or that builds a mind that breeds innovation. Because here's an important point. Different doesn't mean less. In fact, it can often mean more. More adaptability, more persistence, more sensitivity. And perhaps more importantly, this is a combination to build more imagination. Because society just needs to catch up and value that kind of intelligence. What are we saying here? So people with dyspraxia often develop powerful observational skills because they spend so much time trying to make sense of a world that doesn't always work with them, or a world that in a sense doesn't understand them. So they become detail orientated, great at noticing patterns, and often deeply reflective. They may spot the nuances others miss, whether in conversation, whether in behavior or abstract ideas. Their resilience is also something to admire. It's something to appreciate, because everyday tasks can feel difficult, extremely difficult, and they can build grit and determination that translates into creative drive and ambition. And again, that's a hell of a combination, creative drive and ambition. So the constant effort to stay organized, keep up, or find new strategies develops mental toughness and adaptability. And these traits are invaluable in problem-solving environments. And also there's another hidden strength. And that's empathy. Because many dyspraxic individuals experience isolation, so they can experience isolation or misunderstanding. And that personal journey can give them a profound ability to connect with others who also feel different. And this emotional depth can contribute to a strong interpersonal intelligence, even when social interactions can sometimes become extremely challenging. Again, we're talking about these various levels of intelligence. Now, I just want to do a quick diversion. So before we go into the final section, let me tell you about my book called Neurodiverse Voices. Now, this book, it's a collaboration of different neurodivergent contributors. And the purpose of this book was to build a neurodiverse product, but more importantly, I wanted to build that neurodiverse product with neurodiverse people. Now, if you're intrigued about this, there is a free sample in the description box, and I'll also leave a sample in the comments. So now let's get back to dyspraxia and intelligence, and let's talk about neurodiversity and the new definition of intelligence. And the premise here is that science is starting to understand neurodiversity. Yes, it's slow. It's like it's slowly, but it's surely. Because it's recognizing that brains come in many, many shapes and many patterns. The one-size-fits-all thinking, that philosophy is fading, for want of a better word. Emotional intelligence and creativity are finally getting their spotlight. They're not just soft skills, they're essential to how we connect, to how we innovate, and how we may thrive in the world. These are 3 questions to aid your understanding of dyspraxia and intelligence. 1. How does dyspraxia impact a person's ability to demonstrate their intelligence in everyday tasks? 2. In what ways can we support individuals with dyspraxia to showcase their cognitive strengths? 3. What common myths link dyspraxia with low intelligence, and how can we dispel them? These questions help raise awareness that dyspraxia affects motor coordination, not intellect. Understanding this distinction fosters more accurate perceptions and better support for those with the condition. Dyspraxia and university. Now, when I did my first degree, I seriously lacked awareness. I lacked awareness of my condition. You see, I was not aware of my weaknesses. Think of it like this. To solve a problem, you have to first be aware of the problem, right? And I definitely didn't have an awareness of various things, whether it was capitalism, whether it was hierarchy, whether it was the class system, and how to monopolize effectively in society. And ultimately, I did not understand dyspraxia. So what was my goal? My goal in university was to get a degree. That was the focus. That was the sole focus. But you know what? In some ways, that was actually a mistake. Think of it like this. Life is like a game of chess. But if you don't know how to move the pieces, you're simply not in the game. And in a way, that's the thing. Without understanding the game or the rules of life, you're simply already behind before the match even starts. And if you've got dyspraxia, you're neurodivergent, and you're heading into university, whether it's your first degree, your second degree, whether it's your master's degree or PhD, whatever it is, it may be worth asking some questions like, how do I pass? But not just how do I pass, because the more important question is, how do I play this game effectively in a way that will work for me? And that's why awareness is so important, because that's like one of the first keys the key of awareness. And not just the medical diagnosis type awareness, though that can help a lot too, but self-awareness. Because awareness is multifarious. Being able to say, okay, these are the areas that I'm struggling with, and you may be struggling with various things. You could be struggling with planning, you could be struggling with memory, coordination, processing, and processing information quickly. And this would be a byproduct of dyspraxia. And once you can identify these things, you can actually do something about it. Otherwise, you're just in survival mode the whole time. You're not thriving, you're just simply surviving. And let's be real, university can be overwhelming, even when you're neurotypical, because it can be an overwhelming experience. But if you throw dyspraxia in the mix, if you throw neurodivergence into the mix, then suddenly even the simplest stuff like the lecture hall, organizing your schedule, finding your class, writing an essay, structuring your essay, this can feel like 10 times the work. So, how do you make the most of it? I feel that it's good advice to build systems. Actually, no. You don't just build systems, you build effective systems. And these systems, they don't have to look like anyone else's systems. They just have to be systems that help with your productivity. And this is where I would say to start small, because it could be a massive wall calendar where you can literally see the whole month, or it could be a color-coded notebook system. It could be alarms for everything, or time-blocking apps, or my favorite, whiteboards. Love a good whiteboard. Or it could be sticky notes. Whatever gets it out of your head and onto paper, so to speak, utilize that function. Because you don't want to be relying on memory alone. You want to externalize everything. And honestly, one of the most underrated moves is actually to get help, but to get help early. Because universities, they usually have a disability support office. And I know it can feel weird walking into it the first time. But remember, it's a resource because they can sort out support plans. They can give you breathing room. They can arrange extended deadlines depending on the circumstances, or extra time in exams. And they could also, in certain circumstances, get access to specialist software. And there can be study skills coaching. So remember, this is an important resource. And again, this is a transferable lesson. In life, we need to use resources to our advantage. And then the next important thing is community. Now, dyspraxia can be isolating. Why? Why can it be isolating? Because it's often invisible. People assume you're just being lazy, or you're not trying hard enough. So it's important to find people that understand it, that have empathy. This could be online groups, this can be person meetups. Even just chatting to others with similar challenges can be a lifeline. And when I say similar, this could be the neurodivergent community, not just the dyspraxic community. And if you don't want to talk about it all the time, that's fair. But knowing you're not alone can psychologically make a huge difference. Also, social life at uni is part of the game. You don't need to go out every night or be the loudest one in the room. But the point here is that connection matters. Connection is important. Connection is essential for human beings. So try to show up at things. It may feel awkward. You might feel like you're always behind the beat. But the objective truth is that most people are just too busy worrying about themselves to notice. Now, I got to admit that this didn't affect my university experience, because obviously everyone's experience is different, and I had my own network and I had my own connections. But it can affect your experience. So I think community is really important. And also, remember, it's not just about getting a degree. It's not just about getting a degree. Because university is more about learning about life than just getting that piece of paper. In one sense, you could say it's about learning how to live with your brain, or learning how to work around your own wiring. So it's like, it takes trial and error, but it's a massive opportunity to understand oneself And, again, this is a layered thing. We're trying to understand ourselves, and we're trying to understand the world, and we're trying to understand the people in it. But if you can figure out how to function well in that environment, the chaotic timetables, deadlines, constant new information, you're actually building transferable skills for life, or what some would call real life. So yes, getting the degree is part of it, and that's a great accomplishment, but understanding the rules of the game, dyspraxia, capitalism, hierarchy, all of it, all of that, and finding your own strategy, that's how you stop just existing in the system, and you actually start figuring out how to move through it on your own terms. Dyspraxia in business, strategies for social enterprise success. So I have been working on my social enterprise for over a year. And I think there's an interesting story to tell. And of course, in business, there are always interesting stories to tell. Now, first of all, I think there's a romanticized element of business. And I really, really believe that. I think some people feel that in business, it's like you write yourself a check and you're literally your own boss, and it's just all positive, no negatives. And this narrative bias is slightly inaccurate. Let me be real, this narrative bias is totally inaccurate from my perspective. Let me explain. Now, you could, in theory, work for yourself for like 30 hours, 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours, 70 hours, and make absolutely nothing. Because a business, metaphorically speaking, it can be like having a baby. What am I talking about? Well, it costs a lot of money, a lot of energy, and a lot of emotion. And it's your baby, but it cries a lot, and it needs constant attention. Let's take the restaurant business, for example. And I think to paint a picture of how risky business is or how expensive it is, let's look at some numbers. So a small food truck can cost 40 grand to 120 grand. 40 grand to 120 grand. A small cafe can be anywhere from 64 grand to 200 grand. And if you want to open a restaurant, in the UK, that can cost anything from 150 grand to 1 million pounds. Now, what's the point? What's the point of this? The point is this: business is difficult, and business is extremely risky. You are literally swimming with sharks. Matter of fact, you're literally swimming with white sharks. So let me give you an introduction. My name is Nathan, and I have dyspraxia. I was actually first diagnosed at university for my first degree, and there is a strong suspicion of autism. And additionally to that, I have OCD. Now today, we are going to be talking about my social enterprise. And the most obvious question is, well, what is a social enterprise? If you have a social enterprise, well, what is it? Well, from my perspective, or to me, a social enterprise addresses social issues and makes a profit. So it addresses social issues and makes a profit. Let's give some imaginary examples to maybe paint a clearer picture. So let's say we have a tech company, and what this tech company does, yes, it makes money, but it trains unemployed people in coding to make them more likely to be employable in the marketplace. So they're providing social value. Let's give another example. Let's take a fashion brand, and let's say it's called Hop. And what do Hop do? They use recycled materials, and with the profits, they take the profits and they fund job programs. Again, this provides social benefit. And now let's give another example, and let's have a bottled water company called Clear Waters. And what they do, they fund clean water for projects in developing countries. So again, they have a social benefit. And then let's talk about a company that does a form of tutoring. Let's call them Bright Learning. And what do? They use its profits to provide free tutoring for children that are in low-income families. So again, all these fictional examples, they have one thing in common. And that thing in common is that they provide social benefit. So with that being said, what does my social enterprise do? What does neuroexpression do? Well, my social enterprise endeavors to do the following. We provide exhibitions where we exhibit and pay neurodivergent talent. So the artists are neurodivergent. We provide them a platform and we pay them. Additionally to this, we provide facilitation on neurodivergence. And also, we're in the process of creating products which will be created by neurodiverse people. And one example of this is the book Neurodiverse Voices. Again, Neurodiverse Voices is a book on neurodiversity that is created by people that are neurodivergent. Ultimately, I'm trying to create a neurodiverse friendly world. And I have dedicated my life. I have absolutely dedicated my life to this. So for me, this isn't just a business. It's not just about money. Money's part of the equation, but it's more about what I feel is like my calling. It's my purpose. So it's not about just making loads of money. It's more about making a difference. So let me just address the business plan, or go briefly into the business plan. And I think it's important to have a business plan to be taken seriously. That's just my opinion. Of course, there are different camps. Some camps think you definitely need a business plan. Other camps may feel that a business plan is overrated. But from my perspective, I think it's important. And also it's important for people to understand that this social enterprise, it's about dyspraxia and it's about neurodivergence. Both are a part of me, and I'm seeking to be part of the solution, not just part of providing awareness, but part of the solution. So my business plan, it comprises naturally of various elements. So let's address some of these elements. So the first is a purpose, and as I've stated, the purpose is to create a neurodiverse friendly world. And if you think about it, the world is typically created by neurotypical people, so we want it to be neurodiverse friendly. And there's a mission, and the mission is to remove the barriers presented in a neurotypical world, because typically a world created by neurotypical people will have barriers for people that are neurodivergent. And then there's the values, and the values is to celebrate their creativity, which is the creativity of neurodivergent people. And then we have the aims, and the aims is to create positive narratives on neurodivergent people. So what do we do? And I briefly just discussed this previously. We do exhibitions. So we do exhibitions where we exhibit neurodivergent artists. We do facilitation. And we're also about to do, we're about to start our journey in doing product-based business, which I think is important, essential. Operationally, we are looking to commission artwork, consulting and events, but this is all predicated on funding. It's all predicated on the funding that we get or don't get. Of course, there are other elements. There are other elements such as Welsh language, which is essential for a Welsh business. And additional to this, there are projected revenue streams, scalability options, marketing strategies, and some contingency planning, etc. I feel like on this journey I'm learning. I'm constantly learning, like learning every day and adjusting every day. And in one sense, I'm building every day. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that the journey is dynamic and the journey is always evolving. Now, at the moment, at the time of writing, as they would say, the main source of success has been grants. And I have been fortunate. I have had several grants. Now, I want to clarify something. Getting grants, if I'm honest, is difficult. Let me repeat. Getting grants is difficult. Getting grants is difficult. Getting grants is extremely difficult. I hope I've made that point clear. And when you apply for a grant, there's a lot at stake. There's an awful lot at stake. Let me explain. If Jack, our fictional character, goes for, let's say, a 30 grand grant, there's two things that can happen. He can either be successful or he can be unsuccessful. And when you look at those two options, they can be life-changing, but they can be life-changing in a good way, and they can be life-changing in a bad way. And when it's in a bad way, it's not like a gentle no, it's like a punch in the gut kind of no. However, a successful grant can mean expansion, survival, thriving, or taking your project to the next level. And as a business, we're always trying to survive and thrive. But an unsuccessful grant can mean It can mean serious setbacks, re-evaluations, and sometimes even closing shop. Now, I don't have a shop, so when I say closing shop, I mean that figuratively. When you apply for a grant, you are laying your soul. You're laying your soul on paper, showing funders your dreams, your vision, your blood, your sweat, your tears. And you could convey this and have a great proposal, and still they can say no. But also, they can say yes. And I guess the stoic reality, or the reality of the situation, is whatever they say, you've got to keep moving. And this is a letter to myself, because you've got to keep believing. Because this isn't just about business for me. This is about changing the world or providing a solution, one project at a time. And, this social enterprise, I really have some great ambitions for it, and we want to empower various neurodivergent artists. We want to create a positive space, and we want to build a community. What is it like growing up with dyspraxia? So let's start off with the preface that I always begin with. So before we start, my name is Nathan, and I was diagnosed with dyspraxia from my first degree. Also, there is a strong suspicion of autism. I think this preface is important because it gives you an understanding into my perspective. So let's begin. Let's get figurative. Imagine being a lobster in a world designed for dolphins. While others glide effortlessly through life, you're left fumbling with claws too clunky for the task at hand. Imagine that. The world is a stage, they say. But what if you never got the script? What if you tripped over the props, forgot your lines? Imagine that. You tripped over the props and forgot your lines and were constantly playing catch up in a play that everyone else seemed born to perform in. That's what it can be like with dyspraxia. You can feel that you're constantly out of sync, always a beat behind. So let's begin this, and let's begin with the educational struggle, a lesson I didn't fully learn. Now, academia was tough, and we're not going to be able to go into it all. And it wasn't tough because I wasn't bright. I think bright is a word that categorizes intelligence. Perhaps I wasn't bright. But regardless of whether I was bright or not, the main purpose or the main situation that was a difficulty was that I didn't understand how I learned best. I was like someone trying to read a book in the dark. Imagine that, you're in a dark room and you're trying to read a book, only realizing much later that all I needed was to turn on the light. Therefore, I muddled through the earlier part of education, always feeling like I was missing something fundamental. And it wasn't until I went to Cardiff University pursuing my postgraduate degree in social work that I was introduced to the concept of learning styles. In one lesson, I can't remember the lesson, but they handed out a learning style questionnaire, a simple sheet of paper that could have changed a lot of things, or could have changed my life if I had truly understood its importance, or if I had processed what was happening. Basically, in that lesson, it talked about establishing your learning style. For those that don't know, there's different learning styles, whether it be visual, auditory, kinesthetic, etc. And in this lesson, we were presented with this questionnaire, which was to establish which type of learning style were we. So if Jack did the questionnaire, he would figure out what learning style he had, and if Sally did the questionnaire, she would figure out what learning style she had. Now, the problem was, this could have been, this could have been a life changer, but I barely processed it. I skimmed through and thought, that's interesting, and then I moved on. And that was my fault, because looking back, it was like that lesson right there was, I was being handed a treasure map, but choosing to wander in circles instead. And I didn't intentionally disregard it. I just didn't understand the value of it. And that in itself is a lesson. Sometimes we're presented with treasure, but we don't understand the value of that treasure. Because if I had fully grasped how I learned best, or how I was to learn, or my learning style, maybe I wouldn't have spent so much time feeling like I was walking through fog in my studies. So, and with education, I'm not the best educational student, but I since went on. I did a degree in media arts, I did a postgraduate in social work, a postgraduate in social work assessing, and then I did a master's in moving image. It sounds better than what it is, but I ended up doing okay in academia. Anyway, let's talk about driving, which was the roadblock to my employment. And you may ask, what has that got to do with dyspraxia? Let me explain. So when university ended, another reality hit me square in the face, and that was work, or more specifically, the lack of it. I was unemployed. I think it was for 2 years. I wasn't counting. But let's say, for argument's sake, it was 2 years. So 2 long, disheartening years where every application felt like shouting into a void. Simply put, after doing my social work postgraduate course, employers and agencies wanted one thing, and that was a driver's license. And I didn't have one. Why? Why didn't I have one? Well, dyspraxia and driving is like a cruel combination. Now, let me preface this. Clearly, there are some people with dyspraxia that can drive. I simply was not one of those people. My brain struggled with spatial awareness. My reflexes wasn't quick enough, and coordination, it just simply felt like an uphill battle. So this wasn't just about freedom. It was about survival. So many jobs, especially, entry-level ones, expected you to drive. No car, no job. And obviously this causes more issues, no money for lessons, etc. And of course that was a vicious cycle. It felt like running on a treadmill while watching others sprint ahead on open roads. Just to give some clarification, in the end, I had to volunteer for a lower position to enable myself to get employment. And it was quite difficult because in Britain we have a system, or in Wales we have a system, we have a benefit system, which is really beneficial when you're hard on your luck. But unfortunately, I guess it was some type of specialist that was supposed to be supporting me. And, one of their parting words was, when I found a job, they just simply said that I'd be back. And they didn't say it maliciously, but that statement revealed what they thought about me. And I was quite disheartened and saddened by that. But I guess that's the reality in some cases, and here's another lesson. Don't be defined by other people's lack of aspiration of you. So just because Jack may feel that you don't have what it takes, that doesn't mean that you don't have what it takes. That's not an objective truth. That's his subjective truth. So it's really important not to let others define you. And here leads to another harsh reality, and some people don't care. And that part really stung the most, that people didn't care. Of course, I have to take accountability. I made a lot of wrong decisions. But of course, at the time, when you're feeling sorry for yourself, you just feel no sympathy, no understanding, no real accommodations. Just a lot of, well, that's just life, figure it out. As if I hadn't been trying, right? As if I wasn't already painfully aware of how far behind I was falling. Of course, people don't like obstacles they can't see. They understand the broken leg because it's there, it's visible, it's wrapped in a cast. But dyspraxia, it's an invisible struggle. There's no crutch, there's no bandage, no obvious indicator that your brain isn't wired like everyone else. And because they can't see it, they don't believe it's real. So I learned to keep quiet, to stop explaining, to stop expecting understanding from people who had no interest in giving it. The world wasn't going to change for me, and nor should it. So I had to figure out how to move within it on my own terms. Again, I've said this a lot. It's a neurotypical world, primarily a neurotypical world. So you've got to find your way. So with regards to finding my own path, it took obviously years of trial and error, self-reflection. And, in one sense, the education system didn't teach me how to thrive, the job market at one point wasn't offering me a fair chance. But obviously I just had to find a way to make it work. So start focusing on strengths, what I can do rather than what I couldn't. Develop strategies to work around my difficulties. And it's funny because I remember at the time, picture this, I was unemployed and I was volunteering to get a job. And at one point, I remember that I guess you'd call it the job center, they were actually threatening to say that, look, we can take this away from you. So imagine, I'm making every effort to increase my opportunity to get employment, and they are presenting barriers. How unethical is that? It's just crazy. It really is. Anyway, like I said, it's a world that's built for neurotypical people, and a lot of neurodivergent people can be left behind. What's particularly distressing about that was that this was the person that was geared towards working with people with disabilities or people that were neurodivergent. And they were not a bad person. I guess they're just a reflection of the culture and the environment. So what are my final thoughts? The lobster learns to swim. Hear me out. So growing up with dyspraxia was like being handed a toolbox with half of the tools missing and still being expected to build a house. It was frustrating, it was lonely, and often very discouraging. But I'm still here, still learning, still providing to myself that just because the world wasn't built for me doesn't mean I can't find my place in it. So to anyone out there feeling like they're fumbling their way through life while others seem to have it all figured out, you're definitely not alone. And while we may never be the dolphins of the world, just maybe, we can learn to be the lobsters who swim just fine in their own way. Living with dyspraxia presents unique challenges that affect daily functioning and coordination. To deepen your understanding, consider these questions. 1. How does dyspraxia influence everyday tasks, such as writing, dressing, or using tools? 2. What coping strategies or therapies have proven effective for individuals managing dyspraxia? 3. In what ways can family, friends and schools provide meaningful support to someone with dyspraxia? Reflecting on these can help build empathy and guide effective assistance for those navigating life with dyspraxia.